So we've seen static routing. Static routing lets me actually configure up where the next hop is manually. Again, on a small network that works very well, but probably as we scale up, we'd want to work with something a little bit easier, something a little more automatic. That would be a dynamic routing protocol like RIP, EIGRP, or OSPF. Let's take a look at how the RIP functionality works within our infrastructure. So static routing is manual. We have to do it ourselves. Dynamic routing means that the routers will actually talk to each other and figure out how the routing paths should go, where the next hops are. So for our dynamic routing protocols, we have several different kinds. We have distance vector, which is RIP, Routing Information Protocol, and that's what we'll take a look at now. When we configure a dynamic routing protocol, we need to specify which routing protocol we're going to use. So we'll use a command like router RIP to turn on RIP routing, and then what we need to specify is which networks are going to be participating in RIP routing. So if I look up here at R1, for example, I have two different networks defined in R1. I have the 192.168.10 network, and I have the 192.168.20 network. So for R1, I would also need to specify which two networks that we want participating, or which two interfaces we want participating, and we do this with just the classful network boundary, 192.168.20 and 192.168.10 in the case of R1. I don't need to put any mask in here. We'll find that we can actually put the mask in here if we want to, but we don't need to. For all intents and purposes, what the router does is it looks at the subnet mask that's on the interface and it applies that when it does its updates. Well, I suppose we can go back and say with RIP version 1, which is what I have configured here, it doesn't even pass a mask. So RIP version 1 is only classful. RIP version 1, RIP v1 is classful, which means it can only advertise classful boundaries. It only supports FLSM, fixed length subnet masking, so it can only go on the classful boundary. What we will do eventually is we'll switch over to RIP version 2 in the same configuration by just specifying the command version 2, and that will change this instance into version 2. So RIP is only one executable that's running. It runs in two different versions, and you cannot run both at the same time. If RIP is running by default, it's broadcast based, and it does not pass the subnet mask information in its updates. If I type the command version 2, it actually updates the current running version and makes it multicast based and allows me to pass the subnet mask in its updates from router to router. So let's take a look at a configuration, how we would set RIP up to run. Remember, what we want to do is just specify on R1 the directly connected networks that we want participating. So I'll jump into router 1 here. In router 1, what are we going to do first? Press return to get started. You love it when the screen tells you what to do. Password was console. Enable. Password is Cisco. For me, may or may not be in your environment. Let's do a show IP route to see what we know about. And right now, this router only knows about the 10 and the 20 network. As predicted, the 10 and the 20 network are the only two that router R1 knows about. We ultimately want to know about network 30, which is going to come from R2. So to do that, we are going to get router RIP up and running. We want to go into global configuration mode first, and then into router RIP configuration mode by specifying the router RIP command. Notice that my prompt changes to config-router. I'm configuring RIP now. And our configuration is just to simply specify the two networks that we want participating, which would be 192.168.10.0. Again, I don't need a network mask, a subnet mask, or anything in here. Network 192.168.20.0. And that's all it takes for RIP to work. I'll save that configuration just in case something bad happens. Let me put this down, take a look at my router, go back and do a show IP route. What would you expect to see? If you said no change, you would be correct, because we only put entries in here that we've learned from another router.